Men often find themselves blindsided by a culture that hates authentic masculinity, and many have given in and succumbed to the ever-evolving culture and woke society. But not us. We are the Remnant, faithful Catholic men from 3 different generations who reach through the radio to tackle current events that challenge our wills and empower the practice of the Catholic faith through thought-provoking discernment and prayer. So, if you're feeling overwhelmed and bombarded, it's time to turn your radio up and join us for The Remnant on the Carolina Catholic Radio Network.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of The Remnant. I'm Bill Snyder. As always, I'm joined by Ray Haywood and Stephen Thomas. And on tonight's episode, we are going to be talking about a really interesting topic. So I want to jump right in after I remind you that the Remnant Show is sponsored by the Fraternity of St. Joseph Men's Group, and you can visit fsjjourneymen.com to review the easy-to-follow resource documents and consider starting a chapter of the FSJ Men's Group in your own parish today. But as I mentioned, we got a really interesting topic and one that is kind of in the news. So we're going to talk tonight about the near occasion of sin and also the court of public opinion. And we chose this in light of the recent story of John Gruden's personal emails. He's now the Raiders, former Raiders head coach, and he was making some imprudent comments that definitely lacked charity, contained some homophobic slurs and very crass language that detracted from the character of NFL players, coaches, and officials while he was an analyst at ESPN. Now, these were personal emails sent out to different people in his workplace with different friends and things like that. It is very evident if you're following this story, or if you're not, you can easily follow this because it's truly all over the place. All you need to do really is Google John Gruden emails, and you'll get a host of different opinions. But the reality is that John Gruden really did act imprudently. And if you're objectively looking at the situation, one could say that his actions were sinful in sending out emails that contained homophobic slurs and really crass language that detracted from people's character, right? Like, these are things that are sinful in our church. Detraction and slander are sins. And again, we are not the judge of the human heart. God is. But when we're looking at this situation objectively, we can see that, hey, these things are sinful. And these were sent out over a 10-year period. Most of them, the most recent of them in 2018. Again, John Gruden at this time was not the Raiders head coach. He was a analyst for ESPN. And what ended up happening was, after these emails were released, was all of this pressure from all of these different areas of our culture that forced John Gruden to resign as the head coach of the Raiders. John Gruden lost his livelihood because of the court of public opinion, right? That is a fact. All of the pressure, all of the issues, even in John Gruden's statement where he resigned, he said, I didn't mean to hurt anybody, and I don't want to be a distraction because of all of this pressure from the outside that was causing this to happen to him. So for those 2 parts of his statement, we know that there was some serious pressure from the court of public opinion. And, I then was a little bit curious, and I searched the internet, and I learned that John Gruden, I just wanted to know about him as a person. And I learned that he was raised Catholic. Now, whether he still practices the faith, that is not public knowledge. But it brings me to a point I'd like to make. As a Catholic, sin is dealt with inside of the confessional. It's not dealt with anywhere else. Now, again, according to the information that we have, Gruden's actions are objectively sinful. We can say that if you are slandering somebody, if you are detracting from their character, those things are sinful. Do they have consequences? Absolutely, right? We lose friends, we lose credibility, we lose all of those things. But the court of public opinion really doesn't get to decide the consequences. It's up to God what the consequence of sin is. And we all know what the ultimate consequence of sin is. It's that we lose our place in heaven. It's just that simple. And remember, though, that God is perfectly just and perfectly merciful. He has both of those qualities persistently, consistently. He gives us a place to reconcile with him, and that is in the sacrament of confession. And that is where this should be decided. Doesn't mean that there's not temporal consequences. One final note, if you're saying, oh, yes, well, okay, absolutely, the court of public opinion should have pressured him to do this. How? If he can be fired, can he be rehired by the court of public opinion? When and who decides that John Gruden is now back in good graces? Again, that's up to God. God is the only judge of the human heart. Ray, what are some of your thoughts on this and this whole topic? Because I think it's really important that we delve into and we look at this from a multitude of angles, especially in the culture that we live in.
Yes, absolutely. I appreciate the way you placed it all out there for our listeners, because you gave the background to the story. Now I'm going to share some perspective. I'm going to kind of go all over the place here a little. For me at 54, this cancel culture mindset that is becoming the norm in all areas of life for our young souls who know no other view of society is all encompassing. Please don't take my point out of context. I'm not saying what we are discussing here today is acceptable behavior. I'm just saying this behavior is human, and at one time in the recent past, acceptable among men of past generations. Think about these things here now. At one time, it was acceptable behavior to smoke cigarettes in the nursery ward of our hospitals. Let's let that sink in for a minute. I would like to mention some well-known terms used in the past to quickly shed some light in areas of times gone by that are no longer seen or accepted. I would like to question, do these terms even apply any longer? Every saint has a past. Every sinner has a future. Sins of our fathers. Fight the good fight. Boys will be boys. How do these terms of endearment at one time sit with you now? I would like to argue that boys not being able to be boys has led to such confusion that has ended in severe cases of public violence as these fatherless boys lash out in the frustration that is left in the void of their not being able to find their place in their surroundings. There's a lot to take in there. You may want to go back and listen to this again for the perspective. Let's shift gears here for a moment and relate the perspective of looking at something as simple as how a new driver are placed into assigned risk for the first 3 years of driving, or how when we receive a summons for a moving violation, those points come off in 3 years. Do we not learn by mistake? Or in being put into a task in all areas of life? How does this fit into society? Fail fast, fail forward, and fail frequently. Is there no room for this type of thinking in our cancel culture society for the group that is being targeted? And I truly believe that sooner or later, we will all find ourselves in that group that is being targeted. But for now, how does the older generation endure all of the cancel culture that leaves no room for reconciliation, something that Bill was just hitting on with us, that reconciliation in the court of public opinion? I believe that the answer rests in actually hearing what our children are saying, because they feel the same way that many of us older people do, that we are just not being heard. I believe that we are all just mirroring each other in this reality. The difference is that our older generation should possess the wisdom to self-examine through this moment in time with growth as their resolve. Let's introduce a new thought into our conversation. I believe that our children are struggling with the capitalist cultural byproduct of individualism. I believe that capitalism to be our best experiment yet. But like with all experiments, we need to grow from the challenges they present. The struggle that our young generations have with individualism is unwittingly challenging for them. They are not yet ready to reason through this struggle because they know no other view of society that places them at a distance from each other. Capitalist society breeds individualism. I believe our culture to be moving toward an all-consuming consumer's culture. Our technology encourages the same outcome in its all-encompassing algorithms. In big tech's bad intent to keep us all plugged in, to sell us products and ideas, our children's communities are mostly now found in their phones because they're so focused on this. Big tech does not care about our children. I hope that I'm scratching at this awareness here for my peers, for them to contemplate and maybe share what I'm bringing to our conversation tonight with their children and the younger people in their lives. I often say the measure in which we measure. We need to be intentional in measuring out in proper doses our understanding of our children's struggles and bring this all into view for them so that they can work through these awarenesses in a way that's hopefully seen in the lens of humility. That is, if we share it correctly. Our actions have consequences past the court of public opinion. This is the way I feel about it. There was a lot said there, Stephen. I hope some of this resonated in you, Stephen.
Yeah, absolutely. There's an awful lot of different ways to examine the phenomena of the court of public opinion, and it was tough for me particularly to figure out what to say. And both Bill and Ray have offered very good perspective in the current events aspect of this, and I'm hoping that my experience in political philosophy will allow me to make an examination into how this modern phenomenon came about. You know, where did this come from and how did we get here? So I think what we have stumbled into today as a society is very well a meta occasion of sin, at least in our prevailing ideas and values as a culture. And this is due to many things. Many classical liberals, such as Milton Friedman and Thomas Sowell, decried the so-called vision of the anointed, or the liberal intelligentsia of the post-World War II West, so Europe and the United States predominantly, as laying the brickwork to the rise of the socialist states of Europe and the liberal zeitgeist, or spirit of the age, we can observe today, which in many ways, as we can see, are hostile to Christian values and the Christian worldview. And yet the origins of this go back further than the 60s and have their roots in the Enlightenment thinkers such as Voltaire and Francis Bacon. Now, the Enlightenment produced many scientific and technological achievements, and I by no means want to downplay that. They have been of enormous benefit to the human race. Now, I do want to emphasize, however, that the writings of the intellectuals of those days set a centuries-long trend of the West's self-repudiation of its own culture and patrimony, which until that time had been solidly Catholic, or another Orthodox Protestant denominations such as Anglicanism or Lutheranism, both of which had their own counter movements to the secular philosophies that sprouted up during the Enlightenment period. So the key to this self-rejection would be in the ideas of secular humanism. Now let's unpack that. It's the notion that man, humankind, is a perfectible being, and that knowledge of the truth can only be arrived at through human reasoning and scientific explanation and processes. The result is that the intellectual class of that time turned away from God and embraced the new deity of man. I'm using deity in air quotes, which, in my opinion, is a centuries-long drama in poor taste, which is still today being played out. Man's highest thought, up until the Enlightenment, had been to look upward and wonder at the nature of God, and had been humbled in the Catholic religion centered around the Mass. Yet today, as a young man, I see a world rife with arrogance, narcissism, and a rejection of any measure of authority. Society seems to keep sliding further and further into tribalism, which is a byword for factions that seek to cancel enemy tribes. It might sound familiar, particularly between groups who are on the cutting edge of sorts of the modern ideals and those who wish to pump the brakes and merely hold on to an earlier iteration of these modern values. And I see neither of these as tenable, and I see no society capable of genuinely upholding the common good of all its citizens unless it be humbled beneath God and the roles of the family restored.
Awesome stuff, Stephen. And I really, really, really appreciate and like how you talk about the deity of man, again in air quotes, and how again perfectibility is something that we think that we can achieve of our own human doing, and it breeds this type of situation that we find ourselves in right here in 2021. So we do have to take a short break here on The Remnant. You're listening to Carolina Catholic Radio. We'll be right back after these messages.
How's it going, Remnant listeners? This is your co-host, Stephen Thomas. Like you and all discerning men, I am often intrigued and provoked by what I see and what I hear about in the world today, and I wonder whether or not I can reconcile it to our Catholic faith. And my apostolate primarily is that of the Catholic school teacher, but I also write essays and reflections on topics that I believe are either noteworthy or important to the Catholic world today. My work can be found at Musings of a Young Mind. Just search it or put Musings of a Young Mind works.wordpress.com in your search bar. Thank you, and hail Christ the King. God bless.
Welcome back to The Remnant on the Carolina Catholic Radio Network.
Welcome back to The Remnant here on Carolina Catholic Radio Network. On this segment, folks, we're going to be talking about our saint of the week. This week, it's Padre Pio. And so, Ray, would you kick us off with that?
For our brothers out there that need proof of faith, something to see or to touch in our physical realm, St. Padre Pio stands as a very good example. The stigmata that he lived with for over 5 decades is a true testament to our living God, Jesus Christ. So the stigmata is the 5 wounds of Jesus on his feet, on his hands, and his side. And very few people in life get to share in that type of suffering. So St. Padre Pio is also a very good example of how we need to live, work, and suffer well daily in our physical lives in order to work out our salvation and the salvation of our families. For those of us who have not yet found acceptance in suffering, rest assured, I believe there is no way that we can get around living through our physical lives without suffering. So suffering is very much a part of our physical realm. Early on in the revelation of his stigmata, his local clergy chastised him and would not allow him to celebrate Mass with more than one other person. Can you imagine what we know of St. Padre Pio and thinking about when this first came to be, that he couldn't celebrate Mass with just only one other person? He has lived through all kinds of suffering, yet never lost his faith. He's been quoted as saying, when it comes to him being chastised, he's been quoted as saying, "Do we not kiss the hand of the mother when it is the very same hand that disciplines us? Do we not yet kiss that hand?" Think of the humility in that statement. I see St. Padre Pio as a true testament, a man that is both believes in and belongs to the body of Christ. Let's all learn how to be intentional in suffering well. What do you think, Stephen?
I love that exposition of Saint Pio's life, and I just want to emphasize even more just how Saint Pio is an example of how men ought to conduct themselves today. So, like Ray said, Saint Pio was censured at first, and I think that this is reminiscent, at least for me, of society's repudiation of the need for masculinity. So Saint Pio conducted himself in humility, obedience, and with good temperament. It's important that we don't fly off the handle at injustices, especially when they're committed against us. It's more effective in the hierarchy of arguments not to stoop to ad hominems and straw man arguments. Rather, keep your cool, refute the central points, and defend the truth. Like St. Pio, if we are steadfast, the truth will eventually prevail over every falsehood. I'll conclude with this, and I think it's the essence of the lesson of St. Pio, and it's from another famous Italian. Pro Tito annio Milone ad judicium oratio, commonly known as the Pro Milone, is a speech made by the famous Roman philosopher and politician Cicero in 52 BC on behalf of his friend Titus Annius Milo, who was falsely accused of murdering a political rival. Now, Cicero, upon weighing the authenticity of his friend's alibi, is accredited with saying this: res ipsa loquitur, which translates as, the thing speaks for itself. Truth is self-vindicating, and we will all reap its fruit in this life or the next. Bill, your thoughts?
That's really beautiful. Both of you guys did an amazing job at highlighting some key aspects of St. Padre Pio. I want to give you a personal encounter that I had with St. Padre Pio. My family is very, very close to St. Padre Pio. My grandmother actually wrote a letter to St. Padre Pio and about her mother, seeking some information, and maybe some prayers, because Padre Pio had the ability to read into souls. And so she wrote this beautiful letter to him, and we have that letter still today. But one of the and his response, but to that end, she was very, very close, spiritually to Saint Padre Pio, and would often visit the National Center for Padre Pio, located in Bartow, Pennsylvania, and she had the occasion of being able to go when the gloves of Padre Pio were on display, and also available to be, bless other objects and things. And so many people would take a small handkerchief, and they would touch the handkerchief to the gloves of St. Padre Pio and create a third-class relic. And it so happened that my dad had a handkerchief that was touched to the gloves of St. Padre Pio. I was going in for an invasive medical test called a cardiac catheterization. I was really nervous and shaken up and worried about this. And my dad came down the stairs with the car keys in his hand at first. And he's like, "You ready to go at 6 a.m.? We got to go to the hospital." I'm like, "Yeah, I guess," and he kind of sees me staring off in the middle distance and, not really all with it. And he just ran back up the stairs. And, for a second, you think you've won, like, yes, I don't have to go today. And I don't have to go through this. But no sooner did that thought enter my mind was he was down the stairs again, and in his hand was this handkerchief, and he told me the story, and he said, "Just put this on your chest." I think maybe like really one of the first times in my life where I really prayed, right? Like where I really just poured my heart out to God. And I said, "God, whatever your will is here, just make it be yours." And it was an incredible experience. I mean, the emotion and everything just came flowing. But I remember the closeness that I had to God in that moment, and really to Padre Pio. So to this day, I actually have a third-class relic of Padre Pio in my wallet. Like, it goes everywhere with me. I always joke with people that I still cannot bilocate, even though I pray to Padre Pio an awful lot. Padre Pio was said to have been seen in 2 places at one time. So I'm not there yet, folks. I haven't achieved that holiness.
but he is an amazing saint. And so I just want to roll into my ReMENant challenge because of that. And it's this: it's to do a nightly examine. Really examine your life. And Padre Pio was one of those people who was very close to the sacrament of confession, and he could read into people's hearts. It was said about him, and so therefore, if you feel the need to go to confession this week, and if you're close to doing that examine and really thinking about the things that you have done, and delving into that in your heart, a nightly examine is a great way to do that. There's some great Ignatian ones that are out there. Father Michael Sparrow, you can Google Father Michael Sparrow and it'll pop up. He has great Ignatian, a beautiful examine for you. That's what I have for you all this week, and really hope that you end up having a wonderful week as you continue contemplating all of this stuff.
Yeah, I love that. I love that story. I too cannot bilocate as of yet. My ReMENant challenge is simple, and it's a very good companion to confession, I think. So in the face of all the evils in our world today, which offend our Lord in the most blessed sacrament, I would like you to say the following prayer in the evening. Now, this prayer can be found on the Catholic News Agency site if you search the traditional prayer of reparation to the Sacred Heart of Jesus. It's very brief. It'll only take you a few seconds to say, and it goes like this. Most loving Jesus, when I consider your tender heart and see it full of mercy and tenderness towards sinners, my own heart is filled with joy and confidence that I shall be so kindly welcomed by you. Unfortunately, how many times have I sinned? But now with Peter and with Magdalene, I weep for my sins and detest them, because they offend your infinite goodness. Mercifully grant me pardon for them all, and let me die rather than offend you again. At least let me live only to love you in return. Amen. Now I'll toss it over to Ray. I'm sure he's got a great ReMENant challenge for you.
So my ReMENant challenge this week is for me to read the Fraternity of St. Joseph Men's Group Code of Conduct Resource document. And I choose this for what it suggests: that we, intentional men of goodwill, begin to shoulder up and start to change the trajectory for our families and the future generations of Catholics in our own faith communities, as we ultimately hope to change our public square. So here it is, the Fraternity of St. Joseph Men's Group Code of Conduct Resource document. Here's the beginning statement. As men, we lead by example. Let's keep in mind what we say is important, but the way we say it is even more important because our children are watching. And it goes on from there. But as I said, I'm going to go to the ending statement now. And that is, in humility, let's intentionally love each other past our worldly faults as brothers in Christ. Our perfections are in fact what make us perfect in our Father's eyes. Iron sharpens iron. When we're young, we think that our fathers are supposed to be perfect. I know that I held my father to an unrealistic expectation as a young man, but now as an older man and having grown sons of my own, I can recognize that. But when you're young, you don't get to do that. So I challenge the older men out there to hold themselves accountable to have this type of awareness when you're approaching and bringing those young men in your faith community closer to the path. So I encourage all of our listeners out there to find a band of brothers for themselves in their own community and place intent into preparing well our next generations of Catholics. And back to Bill.
Well, folks, thank you so much for being with us tonight and listening to the Carolina Catholic Radio Network. Know that you can always connect with us on social media. The ReMENant Show at gmail.com is our email. But until next time, from all of us here at the ReMENant and the Carolina Catholic Radio Network, may God bless you and your families.
Thank you for joining the ReMENant today. For more information about us, email theremnantshow@gmail.com. That's the ReMENant show@gmail.com.